Our scripture reading tonight is Revelations 11, verse 15. Then the seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdoms of the world have become the kingdoms of the Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever."
Once again, very good evening. If you want to open your Bible to Revelation chapter 12. Tonight we're going to be continuing our study that we have done over the last few months in the book of Revelation. We are now at really what I consider my favorite chapter of the book of Revelation. Chapter 12 and 13 are to me the most exciting part of the book of Revelation. The whole book is incredible, but there's something about chapter 12 and chapter 13 that really gets me excited. And so, by way of remembrance, because I know that it's been a few weeks since we have studied this book, let me remind you of kind of how we approach the book, and that is through this outline of 7 different sections, and in that section there are 7 different points, and so 7 sections, 7 points. You have the 7 candlesticks, 7 seals of judgment, the 7 trumpets, and now we're getting into the 7 symbolic figures. And once again, by just way of reminding you, here's that outline of the 7 candlesticks, which represent the 7 churches. There are some segments in there as well, as you can see that there's a first part about the vision. Then you have those 7 churches and the nicknames that I like to give to them to be able to remember what it is that those churches were about, what the problem was, or what they were being commended for. And then we studied chapters 4 through 7, which is the 7 seals of judgment. Whenever you have that throne room scene, gives you a glimpse into what heaven is going to be like, and all throughout the book of Revelation, he continues to develop this scene of heaven. There's a little bit more. You got to read the whole book, and you get this really broad, wonderful view of heaven, which is still just a glimpse of how wonderful it'll be. So in that scene, you have this picture of God with a scroll, and no one was able to open it except for the Lamb. And then the Lamb comes, and he begins to open those seals that are on that scroll, and those, of course, represent various aspects of history. Essentially, what we have is from the time of Jesus' first advent to the second advent, which will be the day of judgment. And what happens in the book of Revelation, and what so many people do not understand about the book of Revelation, is that time frame is repeated multiple times, which is why it is so important, and I hope it makes more sense now, why we break it down this way. The 7 candlesticks represents really just a time frame within the very first part of, the time frame of John when he writes it, but it represents all churches for all time. Then when you get into the 7 seals of judgment, you are covering that time frame of the first advent to the second advent. Then we looked at the 7 trumpets, and it's the same thing. Whenever you go to these trumpets, it's very similar to what you see in the seals, just said a little bit differently, looked at it from a little bit different approach. I consider it the same thing as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the same story, but told from a little bit different perspective, a little bit different viewpoint. And that's what happens in the book of Revelation. So we've just finished chapters 8 through 11, where we had those 7 trumpets, and there's 7 different points. They are not the 7 seals, and then you start with the 7 trumpets, and then now we're about to do the 7 different figures. It's not that at all. It is covering the same time frame and starting over. In fact, I think here I have, that graphic that I showed you. Just think about that time frame. Let's say the whole thing happens within a 12-point or 12-hour time frame. So the 7 candlesticks covers that whole time. Then you start over with the 7 seals, and you cover the same time. It's not a new set of 12, it's the same one. And then the 7 trumpets, and now here we are with the 7 symbolic figures back at noon, if you will, and about to start again. We're going to do that again when we get to the 7 bowls of wrath, when we get to the 7-fold aspect of judgment, and then finally even the 7-fold aspect of triumph. So over and over, repeating the same time frame. If you can grasp that, then you can easily understand the book of Revelation. Whenever you look at it from what you read online of a lot of teachers and things like that that are not based in good hermeneutical principles, you can get very confused because they want to apply all these different things to it, and it's just not that difficult. Now, when we get into chapter 12, this is the chapter where we see some pretty crazy stuff. Not that we haven't seen some crazy stuff already, right? But now it gets really crazy, and this painting of depicting the scene of what we're about to see in chapters 12 and 13. We'll come back to this picture, but this is a pretty good description of, if you could just kind of imagine what it is we're going to see. And the first thing you notice is that 7-headed dragon that we're going to talk about in just a moment. All right, so before we start reading chapter 12, this is where I want to remind you of some of the key guidelines to understanding Revelation, as I've already mentioned a few. It's about Jesus and it's about hope. But one of the key things, and especially now, from this point on, really through the whole book, but really from this point, it's going to show you that he's speaking in figurative language. And people forget that all the time. Why is that important? Well, why do you think people are writing on Facebook, oh, we're in the end of times, these are the signs, these are the wars and rumors of wars, and this is it, this is the end? Well, I could say the same thing, or the people from back in the Civil War era could probably say the same thing, because things are pretty crazy back then in America, weren't they? You go back a few years before that, during the Spanish Inquisition, I bet those people in Spain were thinking, this is the end of times. And so over and over you see that there is application, but nobody knows. Remember? Jesus says, of that day, nobody knows. And so there's spiritual application, and it all has to do with symbolism and figurative language. Plus, you need to know the Old Testament. You need to go, oh, this is the same type of language that Ezekiel used. Oh, this is how Daniel said that. Oh, I see what's happening. John is borrowing some verbiage from Jeremiah or from Zechariah or something like that. It helps you understand why he's saying it the way he's saying it. So it requires critical thinking. You got to use your head, use your noggin whenever you're reading the book of Revelation. All right, let's read chapter 12. A pretty incredible chapter. You're going to have 3 main characters. So I told you there's 7 symbolic figures. You're going to see the first 3 right here. A woman, a child, and a dragon. All right, here we go. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. That being with child, she cried out in labor and pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she bore a male child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has placed a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman, and they gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times and a half time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Wow. Is your head spinning? It's a whole lot of stuff in there, isn't it? Wow. Okay. How many of you like Lord of the Rings? All right. I knew there were going to be some. How many of you like Harry Potter? All right. Now, if I were to say that, for example, I don't know much about the Lord of the Rings, but I know a little bit about Harry Potter. If I were to say, if you run through that wall, it's going to be just like Hogwarts. You can go right through there like you're in the train station, and it's going to take you on the way. Would you believe me? You wouldn't believe me, because you know that what is that work? It's fiction, right? It's just imaginary type fiction. Well, this isn't fiction, but it is symbolic language. All right. So just to illustrate and emphasize the point, we have this dragon, right? And we're going to talk more about the dragon and everything, what all that means. But we have this dragon. And the Bible itself tells you who the dragon is. All right? The dragon is, as it says in verse 9. So you see in verse 3 this character, this figure presented, and you're thinking, whoa, that's scary. This 7-headed dragon breathing fire and then later breathing a flood of water. I mean, this is crazy. This is like the stuff out of Narnia and stuff like that, right? It's just crazy stuff. But then it tells you who it is in verse 9. In verse 9, what does it say? The devil, old Satan. Now, simple question. Is Satan a literal dragon? Do this. All right? He's not. He's a being. He's a living being. From what I read in the scripture, he was once like equal to one of the cherubim or the seraphim. He was a guard angel, and yet God threw him out of heaven. Now let me ask you another question. We read earlier in chapters 4 and 5 when it literally said there is a lamb standing there beside God as if it were slain. And then a few verses later it called it a lion. And then it went on to say, who is the Christ? Is Jesus Christ literally a lamb? Once again, right? He's not. So what does that tell us? It's figurative language. So we're talking in a form of poetry, a poetic way, right? So whenever you have figurative language, you don't just pick and choose, this is literal, this is figurative, and do that. You have to take it in context. So you have that very here. A great sign appeared, and you have this woman. All right, this woman, notice that she's clothed with the sun. All right, listen, my wife looks fantastic in her clothes when she gets dressed, but I've never seen her dressed in the sun. That would be pretty wild, wouldn't it? So this is clearly poetic use here. Clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. All right, let's just talk about the woman for a minute. So we see this woman. This woman's about to give birth to a child. Now, easily, you could think, oh, that's Mary. That's got to be Mary. Well, again, this is figurative. It's symbolism. Yes, Mary did give birth to the Messiah physically, but this is symbolism. So who, in that case, in symbolism, a woman gave birth to the Messiah? And notice it says a garland of 12 stars. Well, we know that Jesus came through the nation of Israel. That this woman, if you will, is the nation of Israel. Of those 12 tribes, Jesus was born of the tribe of Judah. This is all through the Old Testament. So this woman represents Israel. Now, if you were paying attention as we were reading, you notice that the woman, once she gave birth, then the dragon persecuted that woman and tried to destroy that woman. But she was caught up in, it says there, with wings of an eagle. And then later it says that God prepared a time for her, a place for her, and a time for her. God took care of Israel. He took care of Judah. But then there comes a point whenever that is done away with, and on the day of Pentecost, a new Israel comes in. We are called the spiritual Israel. There was a physical, actual Israel that gave birth to a physical, actual Messiah. Well, now there is the church, which is a spiritual thing. We are the church. And so the church is called the spiritual Israel. And so you have two things here. So you see that then the woman goes on and she is pursued by the dragon. Simple question. Is Satan trying to attack the church today? There you go. And so this is symbolism that extends even over to us. And it goes all the way until the end of time. So this woman goes from physical Israel to spiritual Israel. And you're going to see that more as we move through the book. And what did Jesus say? The gates of Hades shall not prevail against her. So, is this dragon going to be able to win? Is this dragon going to be able to kill the child? Because that's what we have. We have these interesting scenes that are happening. We have the dragon trying to kill the child. Did he defeat Satan? I said that wrong. Did the dragon defeat Jesus? No. In fact, it was prophecy come true from Genesis 3, verse 15. Jesus defeated Satan. He defeated the one and only power that Satan had, and that was death. Death has been conquered, so he didn't kill the child. Now, think about that. Did he kill the child physically? People hung the Son of God on a tree physically, but did he kill him spiritually? This is a spiritual battle. No. Jesus won that battle. The same thing with the woman. And then even the descendants. Who are the descendants of the woman? That is the continual propagation of the church. What do we say often? We say, for example, Avalon, we call them our sister congregation. And Airport Road and all the different places, Scenic Hills and everything, those are our sisters. Those are the descendants of the church. It continues to grow and propagate. So the dragon tries to kill Jesus. He tries to kill God's people. And then even today trying to kill the church. And so you have this incredible being that is constantly trying to destroy the creation or the plan of God. And so is it going to be victory for the dragon? That's what it's playing out here. Is there going to be victory for the dragon? Absolutely not. In fact, it shows us the lesson we learn is no one can frustrate the purposes of God. Amen? That's what you take from this book, is that this is an interesting poetic way of saying it, but God wins in the end. And here we see that even in this spiritual battle that's taking place, this is the same spiritual battle that Paul writes about in Corinthians, the same spiritual battle that's written about all throughout the Bible, but here it's just kind of laid out in a little bit different picture with this seven-headed dragon. So what we have is, we have the woman. The child clearly is Jesus. Notice what it says about the child. It says that she bore a male child who was to rule all nations. Isn't that how Jesus is described in the Old Testament? That's how he's described even in the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 1, 20 through 23, Colossians 1:18, and so forth. He's the King of kings, the ruler of rulers. He's above all and is all. And her child is caught up to God and to his throne. So you hearken back to chapters 4 and 5 where you see that Lamb of God right beside the throne of God. So there's these three characters that we have, a woman, a child, and a dragon. Now, we've looked at this chapter and we see all these things that are happening. Do you now have a clearer picture that this is just symbolic literature? This is not a literal dragon. This is not a literal woman and child and all that. It's symbolism. I think it should be pretty clear. I'm making a big deal out of it, but it drives me crazy when I talk to a lot of my religious friends and they want to make this stuff in here literal. For example, we're going to get to it, trust me. We're going to get to the getting the stamp on your head and the beast and all that stuff in just a little bit, and even later on, but especially the 1,000-year reign. That comes from Revelation. And the 1,000-year reign is right in the middle of the dragon. It's talking about the dragon, talking about the lamb, talking about all these other things. And I'm like, is Satan a literal dragon? Is Jesus a literal lamb? Then why do you want to take the 1,000 years and say that's a literal kingdom that God's going to set up? That's what's going on. All this hype and everything about Israel and everything is all based off of misunderstanding passages like that. So here are your 7 symbolic figures. You get the first 3. All right, chapter 12 introduces us to the first 3. We get into the next chapter, chapter 13, and we get the next 3. All right? So chapter 13. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his head a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it were mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue the 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in the heavens. And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, those whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. All right, so what we just read is we got this beast that has come up out of the sea. And a lot of times people want to talk about the mark of the beast, right? Well, keep reading, because there's more than one beast. Look what we have now, verse 11. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. Now remember, the first one came up out of the sea. This one comes up out of the earth, and we'll address that in just a moment. And he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon, like the dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven and on the earth and in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by the signs which he is granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and the image of the beast should both speak and cause many as he would not to worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand and on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark of the name of the beast on the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who understands calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Got to say that with emphasis, right? This is the part that scares everybody. You got these 2 beasts, a beast of the sea and a beast of the earth. All right? And then you have those that are marked by the beast. So now we have 6 characters. We have a woman, a child, a dragon. We have a beast of the sea, a beast of the earth, and a beast or people marked by the beast. So there's these 6 different characters. There's still one to go, but we'll get to that in a little bit. All right. So that's why now, look at that picture, you can see. There's the dragon with the 7 heads. Then there's this beast that comes, notice the water, comes up out of the water, and he has those heads, right? And one of them, they have these crowns on them, and one of them is wounded. Then you have this other beast that comes up out of the land, and then you have the people who have the mark of the beast on their foreheads and on their hands. All right? So here's what happens. People read this, and man, their imaginations go wild. What is the image, the mascot of the United States? It's a bald eagle. What is the mascot of Russia? The bear. What's the mascot of, I believe, if I get these right, the mascot of England is, or Great Britain. Yeah, there it is right there. Britain is a lion. You have the UN, somebody came up with that, and then the EU has its own thing. So everybody's trying to make, these are the different, this is the United Nations. No, it's not the United Nations. This is spiritual. This is not a physical. Don't try to apply something physical to that. Now, what do these 7 heads of this beast that rises up out of the water represent? Now, here's where you need to understand a little bit about figurative language and this literary device that is used in apocalyptic language. The numbers that are mentioned, I'm going to talk more about numbers later, but the numbers that are mentioned mean stuff. Remember what the number 7 means. It means perfect. It means complete. Well, notice that this beast had 7 heads, and it was talking about how it had power, and it was basically a government. And that's one thing we learn about water. Water represents the multitudes. It represents the population of the earth because it covers the earth. And so this beast comes up out of the population, the multitudes, and it has these 7 heads that have these crowns. Well, there's 7 hills in Rome, the governing power at the time. So could it symbolize those 7 hills, and those crowns represent the Caesars that were there through that time frame? In fact, there's some that think that the one is Nero, who tried to commit suicide, and so he then did not wind up dying from it. So he had this blow that turned into a fatal blow. Then there's others who believe it is Domitian. There's all kinds of things you can add to it. Still not the point. The point is that there is a government, there is a type of beast. This represents governments who, what was the description of them? They persecuted the church. They persecuted the people of God. They are an antichrist. They're against God. They're against Christ. Then in the earth, which the earth many times represents religion, and so you have this beast that comes up out of the earth. It is an antichrist from a religious point of view. So what you wind up having is you wind up having governments and religious institutions which persecute the true nature and the church itself. It's symbolism. And so even whenever you think about it, it's talking about how one built up this image for the other. Well, that was happening in the time of John. You had these emperors who were saying that they themselves were deity. They were God. There was even an edict that was sent out deifying Julius Caesar after he had already passed, making him into deity. And people were required to worship, to fall down and worship Caesar. Now, what did it say about the beast? People were required to fall down and worship the beast. There are still people today, there are still leaders today that expect people to fall down and worship them. It's not changed in over 2,000 years. So these beasts represent, they're symbolic, just like Satan is the dragon, and just like the woman representing Judah or representing Israel, and then the church. These are symbolism. So you have this beast represents governments that are against God, and you have the ones out, the beast out of the earth represents these different religious entities. All right, so you get into numerology, and I know I've got just a couple more minutes here. I think I can cover this. So what does all this mean? Notice I went right over the part where it says that 1,260 days they were sent off and all this. Don't get bogged down in that. It's just simply a number. It's a prescribed time. It's a long time that God knows. We've been waiting for Jesus to come back for over 2,000 years. He could come back tonight. He could come back 10,000 years from now. It's in God's time. He knows the number. But all these numbers mean things. The number 12 often represents the church or represents Israel. Number 7 represents perfection. So what does 666 mean? You know, oh man, this is where everybody goes nuts. And there's all kinds of stuff. If you look on the internet, 666 is the mark of the beast, which represents the Catholic Church, is what some people will say. That's why they put that lint on your forehead. No. 666 is on your UPC codes. Everybody's got a UPC code. Oh man, you got in the mark of the beast. No. Some people then take, and remember that verse, it says calculate his number. That number is Hitler. And so people want to take and they've tried to calculate all these numbers and everything, and they add numbers to, or letters to the numbers, because you can do that, right? Just like how binary works. So many numbers represents a certain thing, and you can add these numbers together and you can come up with all kinds of things. Some people have come up with Nero being who they're talking about. Somebody else has come up that it was Hitler. Well, man, you could just, depending on how you do it, you could come up with anything. It all depends on what you start with. So I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to take these numbers that are symbolism. I'm going to start with a known fact. I'm going to use the phrase cute purple dinosaur. And if I take the letters of cute purple dinosaur and I convert those letters to Roman numerals, because in Roman times the letter U was a V, and V stands for what? 5, right? 1 is 1, V is 5. Notice I also have a C, I have a T, I have the L and the D and the I. It just so happens the phrase cute purple dinosaur has CVVLDIV, which is 100 plus 5 plus 5 plus 50 plus 500 is D, plus 1 plus 5. I got 666. Y'all, I have figured out who the Antichrist is, who the mark of the beast is. It's Barney. It's Barney. It is Barney. Coincidence? I think not. Proof positive that Barney is the beast. I think you get my point. Nobody knows. It's symbolism. All right? It's symbolism. Now, there is some symbolism that you can apply in there. The point being is this, and I hope I can get to this real quick. You got those. There we go. I'm going to jump past this, and I'll come back to this next study. Here's the point. You have God's allies, which are the Lamb and the 144,000 that were sealed. Oh, we've already talked about somebody who was sealed, remember? They had the seal of the Holy Spirit in the same place, the forehead and the hand. Now you have Satan's allies. Satan himself, but he has these two beasts. He has governments that he uses against the church, and he has the religious institutions against the church. And there are those who bow down and worship those two things. Still happening today, isn't it? So that's the main point that you take from chapters 12 and 13, is appearance and contrast. And really what it's all about is the same thing it continues to be about. God's in control. God knows what's going on. We're in the middle of a spiritual battle. But the main thing is God wins in the end. That's what the book of Revelation is about. So yes, there's some crazy verbiage in there. There's some crazy imagery. I mean, dragons and all this other stuff. And we'll explain a little bit more detail in our next study next month when we get back to the book of Revelation, what more of this means, because there is a culmination to all of this. But right now, I hope that you have a better understanding of 12 and 13. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of the mark of the beast. You need to be worried about having the mark of the Spirit. Do you have the mark of the Spirit? How do you get the mark of the Spirit? You get the mark of the Spirit the same way you get the mark of the beast. You submit to one or the other. You either submit to the beast, that being the earthly things that Satan uses to combat the church, or you submit to God through his Son, Jesus Christ. You do that by hearing the gospel, by believing what you hear. This is all true, y'all. And then repenting and changing your life. Deciding you're not going to live that worldly life anymore. Confess his name. You know, even those who who bow down to the beast and to Satan, they confess his name, and then be baptized. And what is baptism? It is a way of showing pure commitment. God, I'm committed to you. I'm so committed to you that I'm going to do this, that I'm going to kill myself, not physically, spiritually, by being buried, putting to death the old man, rising up in newness of life. Have you done that? If not, why not? Arise and be baptized and wash away those sins. Or maybe tonight, as we're talking about this spiritual battle, you realize, you know what, I need to get my life right with God because I want my name written in the Lamb's book of life, not the book of the beast. So where are you tonight? We're going to sing a song of invitation. If you need to respond, please let it be known as together we stand and sing.